Imagine a world where people stop questioning. Imagine a society where beliefs are adopted blindly, where opinions are repeated without reflection, and where the idols of culture, politics, or even spirituality dictate what individuals should think, feel, and desire. Sadly, this is not just imagination. This is the reality we often face today. The death of critical thinking is not a distant possibility. It is an ongoing process, and the symptoms surround us daily. Pause for a moment. How often do you truly question the information you consume? How often do you pause before clicking, liking, sharing, or repeating something you heard? Many people believe they are free thinkers, yet they remain chained to the idols of modern culture. Whether these idols are celebrities, political leaders, social media influencers, or even collective narratives that promise truth while delivering conformity, this video is an invitation to awaken. We will explore the dangers of ignorance and idolatry, and how both lead to the slow erosion of one of the most powerful human capacities, critical thinking. By the end, you will not only understand the mechanisms that silence independent thought, but also discover ways to revive your inner strength to resist them. And stay with me until the last part, because the final revelation we will uncover is the most powerful of all, one that could transform the way you perceive truth, freedom, and even your own identity. Let us begin with ignorance. Philosophers through the centuries have warned us about its destructive force. Socrates famously declared that true wisdom comes in recognizing how little we know. This humility, this awareness of ignorance, was not meant to paralyze but to propel the pursuit of truth. Yet in our modern age, ignorance often takes a different form. It is not the humble recognition of what we do not know. It is the arrogant dismissal of complexity, the willful blindness to facts that challenge our worldview. It is when we prefer comforting illusions to inconvenient truths. Consider how social media amplifies this phenomenon with endless streams of content. People feel informed, but in reality they are often trapped in echo chambers. Algorithms feed us what we already like, what we already agree with, reinforcing biases instead.
Idols promise security, meaning, and belonging. But in return, they demand our uncritical loyalty. Think about it. When was the last time you saw someone defend a public figure with almost religious devotion, ignoring all evidence against them? When was the last time you noticed how brands or lifestyles are worshipped as if they carried divine power? This modern idolatry is subtle but dangerous, for it demands conformity, and conformity is the enemy of critical thought. The philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche wrote that people often prefer to worship false idols because it relieves them of the burden of thinking for themselves. To question is uncomfortable. To analyze is exhausting. So many surrender their autonomy to leaders, to trends, to narratives, believing that by following they are safe. Yet in reality, they are enslaved. The connection between ignorance and idolatry becomes clearer the more we observe society. Ignorance creates the fertile soil in which idols are planted. Without questioning, without seeking, without reasoning, people become vulnerable. Idols, whether political, cultural, or spiritual, then take root and dominate. Over time, critical thinking dies, replaced by repetition, dogma, and blind devotion. Yet not all is lost. History shows us that every time critical thinking was under threat, courageous minds rose to challenge the status quo. The Enlightenment, for example, was born out of such courage. Thinkers like Immanuel Kant urged individuals to dare to know, to step out of the comfort of dependence on external authority, and to think for themselves. That same call echoes today, perhaps more urgently than ever. As we continue in this journey, we will explore not only how ignorance and idolatry destroy critical thinking, but also how we can resist. To understand why critical thinking is dying, we must go deeper into the inner workings of the human mind. Ignorance and idolatry are not just external forces imposed upon us. They thrive because of certain psychological needs and vulnerabilities that are common to all of us. If we are not aware of these mechanisms, we become easy prey to manipulation. Why do so many people prefer simple answers to complex questions? Why is it easier to follow than to think independently? The truth is that the human brain is wired to seek certain safety. A strong leader, a comforting ideology, or a rigid tradition tells us, "Follow me, and you will not have to worry." And so, without realizing it, many surrender their freedom of thought in exchange for the comfort of the longing. The psychologist Carl Jung spoke of the collective shadow, the parts of humanity we refuse to face. When individuals suppress their doubts and insecurities, they often project their need for strength onto idols. This explains the passionate devotion to charismatic leaders, celebrities, or even abstract ideologies. Jung believed that unless we confront our inner shadows, we will continue to worship them outside ourselves, giving away our power to those who pretend to carry the answers. Modern society provides endless idols. Technology itself has become one. People trust algorithms more than their own reasoning. If a search engine ranks a piece of information first, many assume it must be true. If social media highlights a trend, people assume it must be valuable. In reality, these systems are not built to reveal truth, but to maximize attention, profit, and control. How many of your opinions are quietly shaped by invisible algorithms, by what you are shown and what is hidden from you? The tragedy is that in this age of information, ignorance has not disappeared. It has only been repackaged and distributed more efficiently. And yet, we cannot only blame external systems. The death of critical thinking also arises from within. Many people do not want to think critically because it is uncomfortable. To question cherished beliefs often means destabilizing one's own identity. The philosopher Jean-Paul Sartre spoke of bad faith, the tendency of humans to deceive themselves in order to avoid responsibility. Critical thinking forces us to confront uncomfortable truths and take responsibility for our choices. Idolatry, on the other hand, absolves us of that burden. When we worship someone or something, the responsibility shifts outward. This abdication of responsibility feels safe, but it robs us of freedom. Philosopher Hannah Arendt, when reflecting on the horrors of totalitarianism, observed something chilling. She wrote that the greatest evil is not radical hatred, but thoughtlessness, the inability or refusal to think critically. Ordinary people in their politics. Leaders throughout history have understood that ignorance among the people can be a valuable resource. When citizens are uninformed or uninterested in the complexity of governance, they can be guided by simple slogans, by emotional appeals, or by charismatic performances rather than by rational debate. George Orwell, in his timeless novel 1984, warned us that the control of language leads to the control of thought. If you can limit the words people use, you can limit the questions they ask. Today, political discourse is often reduced to fragments, tweets, and sound bites. Perfect instruments for shaping emotion without leaving space for reflection. But politics is not the only sphere. Consider consumer culture. Marketing industries spend billions every year, not to awaken your critical mind, but to bypass it. Advertisements are carefully designed to trigger desires and emotions, to create idols out of products and lifestyles. A brand becomes not just an object, but a symbol of identity. We buy not because we need, but because we believe it will fill an emptiness within. This is idolatry repackaged. The media, too, bears enormous responsibility. News outlets often claim to inform, but in practice many are structured to provoke outrage, fear, or loyalty to a particular narrative. When information becomes entertainment, truth is secondary to engagement. And once again, ignorance is disguised as knowledge. The German philosopher Jürgen Habermas
argued that democracy requires a public sphere where rational debate flourishes. Yet what we often see is not debate but spectacle, and spectacle does not nourish critical thought, it starves it. Now let us step into the world of technology and social media. Never in history has humanity had access to so much information, and never has misinformation been so powerful. Algorithms do not prioritize truth, they prioritize engagement. They are designed to feed you what will keep you scrolling, not what will challenge your perspective. The result is a culture of idols, influencers who embody curated lifestyles, viral movements that demand unquestioned allegiance, and digital tribes that offer belonging in exchange for loyalty. We must ask ourselves, what happens to a society where critical thought is replaced with constant stimulation? The answer is dangerous. When individuals no longer analyze,
supposedly enlightened age, similar patterns reappear. The common denominator is the refusal to carry the burden of personal thought. But the very recognition of this problem is already a step toward freedom. The moment you begin to see how ignorance and idolatry are used against you, the spell starts to break. Critical thinking may be under attack, but it is not dead if you choose to revive it within yourself. Every time you resist the urge to share something without verifying, every time you pause to ask, "Is this true? Who benefits if I believe this?" you are reclaiming your power. To think critically in a culture of conformity often means standing alone. Albert Einstein once said, "Unthinking respect for authority is the greatest enemy of truth." To think critically is not to reject all authority, but to weigh it, examine it, and never surrender blindly. We have traveled through the shadows of ignorance and idolatry, seen how they silence our minds, and uncovered the mechanisms through which society sustains their power. But now, it is time to shift our focus toward liberation. If ignorance and idolatry are the chains that bind us, critical thinking is the key that unlocks them. How can we as individuals and as a society revive the dying art of thinking deeply, freely, and courageously? The first step is awareness, but awareness alone is not enough. We must actively cultivate habits of critical reflection. Socrates taught that the unexamined life is not worth living. This means that to truly live, we must constantly question ourselves, our beliefs, our desires, our assumptions. Self-examination is not an act of weakness, but of strength, for it frees us from the unconscious patterns that ignorance sustains. Each time you ask yourself, "Why do I believe this?" you are sharpening the blade of your mind. The second step is the discipline of seeking truth, even when it is uncomfortable. Philosopher Immanuel Kant declared, "Dare to know, have and dialogue are meaningless. Courage is what transforms knowledge into action. Courage is what allows us to resist idols, to stand firm when conformity calls us to kneel. Courage is what allows us to remain independent thinkers in a world that punishes dissent." And here lies the most powerful revelation of all. Critical thinking is not merely a tool for intellectual clarity. It is an act of freedom, and freedom is the essence of human dignity. When you think for yourself, you reclaim ownership of your life. You are no longer defined by the idols of society, the manipulations of media, or the weight of tradition. You become, in the deepest sense, fully human. This is why ignorance and idolatry are so dangerous. They do not merely cloud the mind, they rob you of your humanity. To surrender your ability to question is to surrender your very self. But to awaken, to think, to challenge is to come alive. The philosopher René Descartes, often called the father of modern philosophy, began his search for truth by doubting everything. He stripped away illusions until he reached the undeniable truth of his own existence. I think, therefore I am. This phrase is more than a philosophical statement. It is a declaration of freedom. To think is to exist fully. To question is to live authentically. And to surrender thought is, in a sense, to die while still breathing. In a world drowning in noise, you have a choice: to follow blindly or to awaken. If you choose to awaken, you may not find comfort, but you will find truth. And truth, though demanding, is the foundation of a life worth living. Remember this: ignorance is not innocence. Idolatry is not devotion. Both are prisons. And only through the fire of critical thought can you break free. Let it be the moment you decide that your mind, your freedom, and your humanity are too precious to give away. Because the death of critical thinking is not inevitable. It ends the moment you and I decide to think again.